Hello, welcome to this webinar and thank you for joining. My name is Bas Voktbergen and I'll be your host today to welcome you and support where required. My colleague Ryan Sainsbury will be presenting this webinar. If you have any questions or audio video issues, use the chat or Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to get in touch. We might answer them on the fly or at the end of this webinar. Without further ado, let me hand over to Ryan and let's get started.
Thank you very much for that, Baz. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Sainsbury. I work for Pharos Architectural Controls. I am a technical project specialist. Welcome to today's webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about all the new features in our new release of Designer 2.8. And I just want to start off by saying that this webinar basically requires you to have some previous knowledge of Designer and also how our system works, just because we're going to be talking about some new features that build on key concepts of what we do. And we also just want to remind you that if you do download the public beta from our website and give any of this a go, there are a couple of things that you might need to remember. First of all, when you download the beta from our website, you will need to do a firmware reload on your controllers. You can do that in Designer, just select the controller, hit firmware reload. Of course, the reload can go back to whatever it was doing beforehand, but it's really important that if you do open up a project file within the new version of Designer, make sure you make a backup of it first. Once you hit save, you can only then keep that show file working in that version of Designer or in later versions. You can't go back to a previous version if you save your show file in the later versions of Designer. There's no reverting back. Finally, it is beta software. Please just use it for testing purposes only. Don't use it on live projects. It's just there for you just to get grips with the new features and tell us what you think. And I think with that all said, we can just jump straight into today's webinar. So the first thing that I want to look at is just the website and how you can actually get hold of the new version of Designer. So currently up on our website, if you go to the download section, software, beta software, you'll be taken to this page. You don't have to register. You can just download the software straight from this page to your computer. It's available for Windows and OS X. And of course, just underneath that, if you need to, you can have a look at some of the brief descriptions of the new features that we've implemented into this release of Designer. That being said, I will obviously go through all of those today. So before we head into Designer, just a couple of final things. We've got some new products. The first product that we're announcing is a new variant of the EDN. So currently we have a 20-port EDN node. The new variant that we're bringing out is now going to be a 10-port EDN node, obviously making it more cost effective if you're working on a slightly smaller sized project. As well as the EDN new variant that's coming out, we also have an accessory device for the EDN, and that's going to be called the SDI, the Serial Data Interface. So this is a brand new product that we're bringing to market, and the idea is that if you have an EDN, you can output DMX to this SDI interface, and it will then convert the DMX protocol into a SD or SPI based protocol. We currently support 12 SPI protocols, which I'll show you in a little bit. But the main advantages of using SPI is that you can have more channels in the universe, 1,536. And also, you can have a higher refresh rate as well. You can go up to 60 hertz with SPI. The SDI will output both synchronous and asynchronous data. And as you can probably see on the screen, both of them have slight caveats. Asynchronous data can go 200 meters from the EDN's DMX port up to the SDI. Synchronous data is 40 meters from the SDI. The other really cool thing about the SDI is that the power supply that you use for your fixtures can also be used to power the SDI as well, as long as it's within a 5 to 28 volt range. So there's loads of information on the website about the new SDI. If you want to check that out, go to products. Then you can go to accessories, SDI, and you can read all about the specification of the new product there. So I think with that done, I just want to crack on and start with looking at some of the new features within Designer, because there's a lot to go through. Once you download the new the new version of Designer, the first thing you might want to have a look at is the new in 2.8 section, which details all of the new features that we've implemented. You can have a read through there, and there's some supporting documentation for them as well. Once you've got to grips with the new features, what you're probably going to want to do is learn how to add the new hardware in so that you can play with some of the new protocols that we've got coming to Designer. So first thing that I'm going to show you is how to add in the new EDN types. So EDNs are classified as remote devices. So just like you would any other device, go to the network view, and then to add in the new remote device, click on new remote device at the top. And then from the type drop-down box, you'll have the option of an EDN 10 or an EDN 20. Pick your desired EDN variant, and then you can assign it to a controller of your choice just by selecting that and clicking add. One of the new features that we've brought into Designer is that you can now name your remote devices, including EDNs, just to make it a little bit easier to distinguish between your remote devices and where they are within your project. Okay, so once I've got my EDN associated with a controller, the next thing that we're going to need to look at is how to configure it with the SDI interface. So over to the right-hand side of the screen where the remote device properties appear, you have an option to have the protocol set to DMX, or if you want to set it to the new SDI interface so that you can output the serial protocols, simply click on that, wait for the page to refresh, and then finally select the desired protocol that you wish to use. So there are currently 12 protocols that we support. They're listed there. You'll obviously need to check that your fixtures support this protocol, but once you found the protocol that you're looking to work with, just simply select it. One other thing that I want to quickly mention as well, you'll notice that if I go back down to the DMX settings underneath it, if I click off SDI, one of the new protocols that we have here is Ultra DMX, or MY9441 as it's known. So this is it's a protocol that we're now supporting, but it requires you to have a very specific chipset. It's a very specific IC chip. I believe it's manufactured by a Taiwanese company and it's in some fixtures, but I believe it's more popular in Asia than it is kind of in the European American market at the moment. This does not require an SDI. It will give you a bigger universe, 1,536 channels. But as I said, it's important to remember that you need a specific chip within your fixtures in order to use this, but we do now support it. For today's demonstration, though, I'm going to be using the SDI based protocols. So once you've got your SDI configured, the next thing that you're probably going to want to have a look at is the patch view. The first thing that you'll see as soon as you come into the patch view is that you now have a full 1,536 channels. I think it's also really important to remember that once you've configured the EDN with a SDI-based protocol, it's really, really important that you remember that that sets the protocol for the EDN globally. You are not able to have 3 ports assigned to DMX and another 3 ports assigned to SDIs. It is just one protocol for the global EDN device. Okay, but patching fixtures and by and large, pretty much everything within Designer is the same at that point. Just pull your fixtures onto your patch window and away you go. So with the introduction of our new SDI device, we are also supporting a higher refresh rate now. We can go up to 60 Hertz. If you want to try out this new refresh rate, obviously your fixtures will need to support it. But if you want to enable it within Designer, what you're probably going to first have to do is go to the Project Features tab. At the bottom here, you'll see that there is the 60 Hertz refresh rate, and it's currently still in beta. So by default, this is disabled. You can, of course, then just go enable it. And as soon as you enabled it, if you go to the network view and if you select controller under the playback drop-down box, you now have the 60 Hertz refresh rate option. So you can apply that, and then anything that you patch to your universe will then be output at 60 Hertz. This is actually, in fact, supported on all of our controllers, and it's not just the SDI protocol. We also support this with ArtNet, Streaming ACN, and KaiNet. There is one small caveat to this, though. If you're going to use it with DMX from, say, something like an LPC, you can only patch up to the first 340 channels. Any other channels after this won't work, and I believe that's been implemented just to preserve the DMX timings. So yeah, really important to note that, and obviously make sure that you're aware of that fact before this release goes live and you go to site with the new version of Designer. So with that now done, what I would like to introduce you to is maybe some of the new VLC enhancements that we've brought into Designer. So in order to demonstrate one of the new enhancements, I've created a basic layout here. This is going to demonstrate our new feature called the Content Target Multiplier. And this is specifically aimed at really big projects using the VLC and VLC Plus family controllers. So I've got a layout here that's 7,680 pixels by 4,320 pixels. And you'll notice that if I select my fixtures and if I zoom in to my screen, I've got my pixels laid out evenly, but there's a lot of white space between each one of my pixels. So a typical example of where you might come across a layout like this would be, I don't know, something like a bridge where you were mapping media to it, or a skyscraper, or even something like a stadium. So I've created this really big layout, but one of the issues that we used to have was that the maximum size of the content target would be about 2.3 million pixels in surface area, or 1920 by 1080. Now you could, of course, transform that and have any kind of surface area as long as the total surface area was not above 2.3 million pixels. But one of the issues with this is if you're working on a really big layout, of course, you'd be stuck with that surface area. We've now brought in a feature underneath the transform tools called the Content Target Multiplier, which allows you just to upscale the size of the content target that you're working with. I should be clear though, your resolution stays the same, still 1920 by 1080, but what you're doing is you're just upscaling your content so that it can fit over your large layout and it can respect the pixel pitch or the white space between your pixels accurately. There has been some other developments that we've made with the VLC as well. The VLC now supports 16-bit dimming, which is particularly useful if you're outputting content at really low intensity levels. So again, typical example would be if you had a media facade in the daytime, you want it to be very bright, but at nighttime, you want to reduce that intensity right down to say 5 or 10%. Now, typically when you do that with 8-bit dimming, you have a really low level of dynamic resolution, as shown here on the graph on the left. You have between 0 and 5%. You have about 13 steps or so. Obviously, with 16-bit dimming, we will still respect that the content's dynamic resolution, and we will give you a greater range to work with, which gives you a lot better visual output from your fixtures. It's important to note that you do obviously need to use 16-bit fixtures to take advantage of this feature. And also, just so we're clear, all of our color content, when you're bringing in media to Designer or when you're creating a Perlin noise, that's all rendered out at 8-bit. We're just preserving the dynamic range using our 16-bit dimming. All of our other controllers already have this, but this is just an update that we've made for the VLC. Now, finally, there are one or two other things that I just want to quickly show you before we move on to do with the VLC. We've now allowed you to rotate fixtures and various different parameters within Designer when using a VLC with 2 decimal places. So you have a higher precision of rotation. So as you can see here in the bottom right hand corner where my angle is, I've got a fixture rotated at about 7.5 degrees. Beforehand, it was just that you could rotate a fixture by a degree or two. And when you're working with particularly big installations, let's say something like a Ferris wheel, that might tend to show itself. But now we've got that extra precision so you can make your mapping even more accurate. The same applies for content targets as well. I've got a content target here and I've transformed that by an angle of 7.55 degrees. So it's in your content targets as well. And then finally, if you're using a VLC Plus and you want to use the transition target action, again, you have a rotation offset that will respect those 2 extra decimal points, giving you, again, further precision. So that's pretty much it for the VLC. There is one other thing that I would like to mention though, so I'm just going to quickly go back to the patch view. Streaming ACN now supports streaming ACN synchronization. So for a long time, we've supported ArtNet and KaiNet synchronization. We've now brought that over to streaming ACN synchronization as part of the support for the E1.31 protocol. So effectively, what this will allow you to do is have better synchronization between your universes, especially if you're on a very big project. So if you're mapping, again, a big installation, you've got thousands of universes, sometimes what can happen is there will be a delay between the nodes receiving universes, and that can sometimes cause tearing or just some steppiness or glitching within your output. So with the Streaming ACN synchronization universe feature that we've brought in, you can now tell all of your nodes to synchronize with a specific universe number, normally a high universe number or a universe number that's at the end of your installation. And then obviously they will wait till each node has received that universe before then displaying that frame. So that can just generally help with your output and deal with any tearing that you might see. So we have new features coming to cloud as well, but we thought it'd be better to deal with that subject in a separate webinar, which is going to be coming next week. So make sure that you tune into that webinar if you want to get more details about cloud. I hear some very interesting stuff is going to be happening, and Baz will be doing a great webinar on that next week. But for now, we're just going to concentrate on what's in Designer. One of the big requests that we've had over the last couple of months is for Designer to have dark mode. So I'm very happy to announce that we finally implemented that, and Designer now has that. So if, like me, you don't have brilliant eyesight, this is really, really good. It gives you a really nice contrast to work with, and also for working in a lighting environment where you may want to have your screen set to a dark mode, it can be particularly useful as well. I'll give you a quick look at what everything looks like, but I really don't think I need to explain this too much. Obviously, the dark mode follows throughout the whole of Designer. Things like layouts are still kept to a white background, but of course, you've always been able to change that. So if you want to make that darker, you can. But yeah, it's looking really nice, and you can enable this for your preferences if you choose to do so. I think what I'll do for the rest of the webinar is I'll just keep it in its dark mode so you can kind of see what all the pop-outs look like as well. So we've improved certain aspects of your workflow in Designer. People, again, who have worked with large projects will tell you that working with high amounts of universes and fixtures, sometimes you can save yourself a lot of time by importing CSV files into Designer. We've improved some of that features now. So now, instead of just importing fixtures and patches from Designer, you can now import groups, and you can also import universes as well. So if I've got a layout like this and I'm going to import maybe a set of fixtures, any group information that's stored within that CSV file will also be imported into Designer. You can import CSV files by going to the import object option in the top right hand corner. You can go to your fixture option at the top. I'm just going to import a CSV file that I made earlier. And then, of course, if I give you a preview of what this looks like on the screen, you can see here we now have this new groups column. So go ahead, import that. And I've imported my fixtures, and you'll see on the left-hand side, I've now imported their respective groups. Again, just improves your workflow, makes things quicker, especially if you're working with a layout that's using lots of groups and lots of fixtures. To continue on from this, we also have now a new feature where you can import universe data as well. Again, just like before, go to the top right-hand corner, click Import Object, go to the new universe option, and then, of course, just import your CSV file. And this will then import all of your universe settings, such as unicast IP addresses. So you can see here we have a new IP address field. If you click Next, Finish, I've now imported that universe, and the settings for that universe, again, are imported with that CSV file. Again, beforehand, you used to have to set your universes up, type in IP addresses for each and every single universe. Now you can just do that in an Excel spreadsheet and then pull that data into Pharos. So then, of course, once you've done that, you can then just go ahead and you can import your patch, and your patch then will obviously just populate like I've just shown you on screen. So Other enhancements that we've made to Designer include the new IO module layout. This has been revamped just so that it's a little bit more easier to navigate and it's a little bit better organized. So for instance, on the left-hand corner, you have your project modules, and then underneath that, we now have new categories for each type of IO module within our library. So device integration, device utilities, productivity, protocols and standards, etc., etc. Also, now when you hit the modules and scripts button at the top, by default, you'll always go to the modules page, as we've seen that more people are using this feature. And just a couple of other things as well. When you go to download new IO modules, if you select an IO module, up in the top right here, there's an option to view the documentation, which allows you just to view the documentation for that IO module so that you're sure that the IO module that you're downloading will, of course, be the correct one. We have added a new released status to the IO modules as well. So for instance, if I take my AccuWeather IO module that's in my project file, you'll see that this IO module has been fully released. But if I go to something like the BACnet server IO module, which is still in development, you'll see that it has limited field testing, just giving you an idea of the how much usage that IO module has had, because we do obviously rely a lot on our customers testing IO modules and giving us feedback. So again, that's there for you to view. And also the other features that we've implemented into Designer within this version include new locations within our city lists. So now we have more locations for you to sync the controllers DST and time zone to. And then finally, last but not least, we have updated one or two parts of our API. The first new feature that we've brought into our API is controller API propagation. So again, this is more for the advanced users that use scripting would like to develop custom web interfaces, but any calls from a JavaScript or HTTP API now propagate across all controllers, or rather any action JS or HTTP calls propagate across all controllers. So typically, if you have a multi-controller project file, it used to be that if you had a custom web interface that, say, I don't know, started a single timeline, that would start only on the controller that's hosting the web server. Now, if you have that button call the same start timeline action, that will propagate across all controllers. You don't need to fire a trigger within the project file like you used to. You can just now make that call and be rest assured that it's going to call over all of your controllers. Also, one or two other things as well. We have a new script API call called get trigger number. So very, very simply, you can call this API call, which I'll show you the syntax for, and effectively what that will do is it'll return the trigger number from the script that's just run. So if I go down to trigger number, yes, this simply returns the number of trigger that's been run from the script. Oh, and one other thing as well that I forgot to mention, we also now have a new action that will allow you to also log messages straight to the controller's log. Before, you'd have to do this in the script or an IO module, but now you can just do that straight from the action as well to make things a little bit more simpler. Okay, I think that's around about it. So I'm now going to just pass back to Baz, and if there are any questions about any of the new features, or if you'd just like to ask something in general, please feel free to ask a question, and we'll do the best that we can to answer that question for you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
So far, there have not been a lot of questions coming in, but let us just stand by for a bit to see if people have some questions. Maybe one thing I just want to clarify, that if you're using the EDN in combination with the SDI, it's not really DMX flowing between the EDN and the SDI, just to make it sure that people don't assume the SDI could be used as a DMX to SDI converter, because that's not how it works. And I guess because it stays quite quiet on the questions, that we might just round this up. And let me take over the screen. Let me be sure that I have the right screen. Here we go. Because of course, if you have any questions that only pop to mind later on, that's not a problem. We're always available for you at support@firehousecontrols.com to answer any questions. So yeah, I think, Ryan, I'd like to thank you again for this presentation. If people have questions, please contact us via support@firehousecontrols.com. After this webinar, you might receive a small survey where you can provide feedback and suggest other topics for webinars. Your feedback is highly appreciated. With this, I'll be closing the webinar. I'd like to thank you for your attendance, and I hope to see you next time.